Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Dom and today I'm going to be showing you how to build this image resizer right here using HTML, CSS and of course JavaScript. Okay, so this solution right here as usual requires no external libraries or frameworks. It's all going to be done using plain JavaScript and the HTML5 Canvas. Okay, so the way it works is you're able to choose an image right up here. So for example, I'm going to choose my stones right there and now it is going to preview my image with the starting width and height. So now with the keep aspect ratio option checked, if I was to change the width to be something like 500, it is then going to maintain the height right here and of course update the size of the image. So now I can just right click this, I can say copy or save and I can then do things with that resized image. Now if you were to uncheck the keep aspect ratio, then make this something like 1000, we can see now the height is going to stay the same, and of course you're then going to get a disproportionate image. So that is the solution, or that is the project right there. So it's nice and small and perfect for you guys who are learning JavaScript or are just curious how this thing works. Okay, so going inside this tab right here, we're going to be beginning from scratch to create what I just showed you, and as per usual, the source code for this project is going to be linked down below if you would like to download and follow along. So going inside the text editor, I have this index HTML. So we're going to be beginning this by creating a new directory right here called src, short for source. And then inside this source directory, let's make a new file called main.css and a second one called main.js. So now, of course, these are your CSS and your JavaScript files for the image resizer. Now, we can include these two files inside the head of your HTML by making a new link to a CSS file, of course going to src/main.css, and the same goes for the JavaScript right down here, script source to src/main.js, and then of course adding the defer attribute. This is going to ensure that your JavaScript code is only going to execute once the document has loaded, and it's going to prevent you from running into undefined errors and things like that. Okay, so we have our CSS and the JavaScript linked up. We can now begin on the HTML before moving on to the JavaScript code. So when it comes to the HTML for this image resizer, we can begin by creating a new div with a class of resizer. So inside this div, we're going to have a couple of things. The first thing is going to be the input field to select a file. Now, we can just say input type of file and then of course change the class to be something like resizer__file. So as usual, using the block element modifier CSS naming convention, but you can name these classes whatever you like. Okay, so we have this input type of file right here. Let's drop down and make a new div called dimensions. And this is just going to contain all of the input fields and checkboxes related to, modifying the dimensions of your image. So inside here, we can make a new input field of type text. And once again, just giving this a class. Now, this class can be something as simple as just, resizer __ input. Now, we are going to be uniquely identifying this one right here as being the width input. So I can just copy this class here, then just say -- width at the end of it to just create a modifier class for that. So it's going to allow us to then select this input field uniquely in the JavaScript. Okay. We can then simply put an X to indicate, width times height, then make the exact same input field, but this time we can make this -- height. Now, you may want to default your values here to be something like 0. So I'll just hop in the end here and just say a value of 0 by default. I'll just remove the sidebar here so we can see more code. There we go. So we have our width and height inputs. We can now move on to creating the checkbox for the keep aspect ratio. So for this, we can make a new label and we can remove the for attribute because we're going to be placing the checkbox and its text inside of this. So we can make a new input type of checkbox inside here. Once again, just removing that name and ID and making this a class of Resizer __ aspect. Okay. Now we can just say something like keep aspect ratio right near, right near that checkbox. Now you may also want to default the value of this to be checked because in most cases you're probably going to want to, maintain the aspect ratio when you are using this tool. Okay. And the very last HTML element here is going to be the canvas itself because we're going to be taking advantage of the HTML5 Canvas to give us our resizing abilities. So going down here, let's make a new canvas and we can simply give this a class of Resizer __ canvas. Now, you can also give this a default width of 500 px and also a height of 500 px or pixels. Okay. Now, as we upload images and, they actually get previewed, this width and height is going to change, but just as default, we can make it 500 by 500. So now, if I was to save this right here and go inside the browser, we get something like this. So as we can see, all of the input fields are showing and we have the 0 and 0 as well as the checked checkbox by default. So now let's apply some CSS to make this right here look like this. Okay, now I won't go into the CSS too much because the CSS is not the focus of today's video. So I'm just going to simply paste what I had inside here. And now you can either, pause the video here. You can copy and paste from the source code below, but I won't go into it because of course, like I said, JavaScript and HTML is the main focus for today's video. So that is our CSS right there. Once again, it's linked below. Okay, now going inside the browser, we now have something like this. So we are now ready to begin on the JavaScript code for the image resizer. Okay, so the first step here for the JavaScript is going to be to declare all of the HTML elements at the top. Okay, so we can just start off here by saying const file input equal to document.querySelector, then passing through here the class of Resizer __ file. So now, of course, in the JavaScript, when I refer to file input, I'm referring to this input type of file right up here. Okay, and we can do the exact same thing for the remaining 4 elements here. So we can now say something like width input equal to query selector, then just say Resizer __ input -- width. Okay, then do the exact same thing here for the height. So just changing these values here to be height. And next up we have the aspect ratio toggle checkbox. So for that one, we can call this something like aspect toggle. And we can select the class here of Resizer __ aspect. And then lastly, it's going to be the canvas itself. So we can just simply call this one here canvas, referring to Resizer __ canvas. So we have all of our 5 HTML elements referred to at the top of this JavaScript file. The next constant here is going to be the 2D rendering context for the canvas. Okay, so we can just say here const canvas context equal to canvas.getContext, and then of course passing through here 2D. So for those of you guys who have used HTML5 Canvas before, you're going to know what this context is, but for those of you who haven't used it before, basically this context allows you to draw things on the canvas. For example, you can draw images, in our case of course, you can draw text, you can fill up shapes, rectangles, etc. So we're going to be using this right here to of course draw and resize our images. Okay, now we can drop down. We can make 2 variables. The first variable here is going to be called active image. And the second variable is going to be called original width to height ratio. Okay, so this first one here, active image, is going to refer to the currently selected image. So basically, whenever the user decides to change or select a new image, it's going to be populated inside this variable right here. And the second variable, this width to height ratio, simply refers to the original width to height ratio of the active image. Okay, so this here is going to help us with the aspect ratio toggle. Okay, so if, for example, if your image was 150 by 100 pixels, okay, your width to height ratio would be 1.5. So now we can use this 1.5 value to then back calculate and maintain the aspect ratio in the situations where your user has chosen to check the box for, keep aspect ratio. Okay, cool. So now we can work on actually getting this, image resizer to work. All right, so the first step right down here is going to be file input.addEventListener. We're going to listen for when the user decides to choose a new file. So passing through change inside here. We're then going to get access to the event object right here. Then dropping down, we're going to run this function. So we're just simply going to then console.log the value of E. So now if I go back in the browser here and I choose a new image, I might just choose the stones again. I press open. In the console here, we have the event object. Okay, so expanding this, we can see down below, we have the target element. So this right here refers to the actual input field itself. If I drop down here, we now have a property down here called files. Okay, this right here is a list of the files which the user has chosen. In this case right here, it's a single file input field, which means of course it contains a single file right down here at index 0, and this file is of course the file object that refers to the stones themselves. Okay, so we're going to access this file right here in the JavaScript, then basically just tell it to open that file, get it previewed, and of course populate everything else. So going back in the JavaScript right here, we can create what's called a file reader. So let's make a new constant right here called reader equal to a new file reader. Okay, now this file reader is going to allow us to read that file which I just showed you as a data URL. Okay, so a data URL is basically just a string of characters in base 64 which represents the actual data for an image itself. So it's then going to allow us to essentially put that URL in the canvas. So we're going to see how this works very shortly. We're going to say here reader.read as data URL. Then we can pass through here e.target.files at index 0. Of course, once again, referring to that stones image right there. Now, this right here is of course going to read the file. We can now say reader.addEventListener will listen here for the load event. So basically, whenever the image has been finished loading, okay, we can run this function. So this function here is going to simply say console.log reader reader, let's have a look here, result. There we go. So reader.result. If I save this and go back in the browser and I choose these stones again, press open, we have right here the data URL for the actual image. Okay, so I can actually copy this right here, make a new tab, I can paste this, and we can see, press enter, we actually have the image right there. So you can paste this URL inside a standard image tag, and that is exactly how this is going to work. So with that being said, if we go back inside here, let's now make a call to a function called openImage. So down here, we'll say function openImage. It'll contain here the image source as a parameter. So now I'm going to simply say openImage, then pass through here reader.result. Okay, so now inside this function, we can actually create a new image object, much like the standard HTML image tag. So we'll say right down here, active image equal to a new image object, just like that. Okay, we can then just say down below this, active image dot source equal to image source. Now guys, remember this right here, this source setting is just like the HTML image tag works. Okay, which means I can now simply say console.log the active image, and we'll see how this looks. If I save this and go back in the browser and I choose these stones once again, press open, we have the actual HTML image tag right here, which we created dynamically containing the actual URL for the image right there. So now, with that being said, essentially our canvas is going to be able to then take that image element or object and display it inside the actual canvas itself. Okay, cool. So that being said, if we just go right up here, we can now just say active image dot add event listener when this image actually loads up, because of course when you set the source here, it'll take a bit of time, or a bit of milliseconds, okay, to actually load up that image. Okay, so once the image has been loaded up after you set the source, okay, we can now say original width to height ratio is equal to active image dot width divided by active image dot height. Okay, just like that. All right, now we can call a new function. Okay, it's going to be called resize. Okay, so this one here will take in your not resize by. Sorry guys, just simply resize. You know what? Let's just try this. There we go. So we're going to be declaring or defining this function very shortly, but for now we can just say resize here. We can pass through the active image dot width and the active image dot height, because by default we want to actually resize the image to be its starting width and height. Okay, it's going to be its default width and height when you first upload that image. Okay, so with this resize function, let's now define that one. Dropping down here, we can say function resize. It's going to take through here the width and the height. So we'll say width and then height. So this right here is going to then take your active image, which of course we set right up here. It's going to take it, and then it is going to basically apply that image to the HTML5 canvas. And alongside that, it's going to set the width and height. Okay, cool. So inside here, we begin by simply saying canvas.width equal to the width which you pass in. The same goes for the canvas height right there. We can now actually update those input fields to correspond with the images, width and height. So we'll say here width input dot value equal to the width, and the same thing for the height input equal to the height. Now I'm going to stop right here and go back in the browser. I'm going to choose the stones once again, press open, and we get 1000 by 750 right there. So we can see we've reached this point here where it's updating those width and height inputs with the correct value. And of course, this width and height here comes from your active image, which we of course assigned right there. So now it's going to be as simple as just saying canvas context dot draw image, then passing through here the active image. Okay, we're going to be drawing on the canvas the active image at the top left corner, so 0 and 0 right there. The width and height of the image is going to be whatever you pass in. So we'll say width and then height right there. If I save this, go back in the browser, we can see if I just choose the image right here, it's going to display the image inside the HTML5 canvas. Okay, so we've actually completed the core functions of this project here. the next step is going to be to simply, make these input fields work. So if I say 500 here, of course, now it needs to update the actual, size of that image. Okay, cool. So going back inside the text editor and going up the top under this file input add event listener, we can drop down and we can just say something like with input.add event listener. We're going to see whenever the user decides to change the value of the width input. Okay, when that happens, we can run this function. Now, if there is no active image, we're going to do nothing. So we'll say here, if there is no active image, we can just simply short return out of this function. So basically, just cancel it and don't do anything. If that's okay, there is actually an image which was chosen. It's going to run the code down here. We can just say resize, calling that resize function right there, and we can pass through the new width and height. So we'll say width input dot value, then height input dot value. So basically, whatever you've set inside the width and height is going to be what the image is going to resize to. Okay, we can do the exact same thing here for the height input. The exact same thing. Okay. Now, if I save this, go back in the browser, and if I was to update, or of course, choose a file, and if I was to update this to be something like 500 by 750, it's going to resize the actual image right there. Now, of course, that doesn't look right because, actually, no, that's fine. Sorry, guys, bad example. It's just because the actual, CSS is limiting the size of the canvas there. If I make this something like 200, we can see a bit better. We get our squashed or our disproportioned image right there. So that is working, but it's of course not maintaining the aspect ratio. Okay, so let's get this function to work. So going back in the text editor, essentially when you update the width input, okay, you want to keep the width which the user has passed in. So we're going to keep the width input.value inside here. Okay, but we are going to change the height value. Okay, so firstly here, let's check if the user has decided to choose the aspect ratio toggle. So right up here, we can just say const height value equal to, then we can just say something like, if the aspect toggle checkbox is checked, okay, if it's checked, then we need to calculate the new height based on the original width to height ratio. So down here, we can just say width input dot value divided by the original width to height ratio, and this right here is going to give you, your height, maintaining the aspect ratio based on, of course, your width. Okay. If the user did not choose that checkbox, we can simply just say height input dot value, as I showed you just then. So defaulting to, of course, the height input's value. Then, of course, just simply passing through here the height value. If I save this, go back in the browser, this is now checked. So if I choose the stones again, I'll make this something like 2000. We should see the 750 turns into 1.5K or 1,500. Perfect. Okay, so now we can simply copy this code and paste it down for the height input. So of course, now just making this instead the width value. This right here is going to be the height value times or multiplied by the width to height ratio. Otherwise, let's keep the original width input dot value. Then, of course, passing through here the width value to the first argument of the resize function. I can save this here and then go back in the browser. I can choose a file, stones once again, make it 400. It's going to maintain the width right there. Now, of course, here you're going to get a floating point number. So optionally, if you go back in the text editor, you can just simply include around all of these, properties right here, or these values. you can just say something like math.floor here, just to, keep a integer or a whole number for your value. So of course, something like that. Save this, go back in the browser, choose the file again, make this 400. Now, of course, you simply get the 533 here. So that's up to you guys. But as we can see, if I was to uncheck the keep aspect ratio, make this 700, it's going to keep the 400 right there. Okay, so that is your image resizer using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.